Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Testing. Yep.
So if my unruly family could settle down here. So this is humbling to have all of you here. A lot of people from every corner of my father's life, literally every corner, and it's just, It is a wonderful turnout. It's far more than we ever expected, and I want to thank all of you. You know, I've spent the last few weeks trying to figure out an elegant, sophisticated way of introducing all of this. And I've delved into philosophy, religion, the circle of life through Disney films. And I had a whole brilliant exposition that was only 2 pages long. And with a PhD in philosophy, which I don't have, you could have understood it. So even I didn't understand it. And I was panicking because I didn't know how to start off, because I just didn't know how to say, what is this all about? Why are we all here? And so this morning, I took a copy of my father's obituary into a copy shop in Lexington Center. And I just wanted copies made. They're out there. If you want to see a chronicle of my father's life, take a look at that. You won't hear it from us tonight. We're not organized that well. But I took the copies in, and the woman came up to the desk, and I said, I'd just like some copies of this. She flipped it around and looked at it, and she just frowned and shook her head, and she said, oh, this is so sad. And I said, do you know him? She said, of course I know him. He was an amazing man who lived a great life. So that's it. We're here because he was an amazing man who lived a great life, and I shelved. So all the erudition and big words that I wrote are gone, thankfully for you. So on behalf of my family, we are incredibly appreciative to have you all here. We have received a tremendous number of notes about how people knew my father, about how he made their lives better. We're grateful for all the support we have all received, and we are grateful that all has been shared with us, and we hope that while you're here tonight, if you have stories that you would like to share about my dad, please do so. Tonight, we are certainly going to mourn what we have lost, but more importantly, we want to celebrate all that my father gave to all of us for so long. In a few minutes, we're going to be led by a very dear friend, Cantor Louise Treitman, who will provide a Jewish reading and song, as well as some popular and appropriate songs tonight. Louise will be here at the start and at the finish of this service. My father's regular attendance at Temple ceased decades ago. But his devotion to his Jewish heritage and to his Jewish upbringing never ceased. And it was only after he could no longer figure out what my sisters were doing that Christmas trees appeared in their homes. And so we are very thankful for all that Louise has brought to our lives generally, but certainly what she is going to be helping us do tonight. So thank you. And there's one surprise for our family, and that is that all of you will be called up at the end to sing a song with the audience. So be prepared. And the song is going to be in Ethiopian for all the non-Ethiopians. You're also going to hear from others. My sister Johanna will speak, as will our glorious coalition, our rainbow coalition of grandchildren. My wife, Cynthia Pilch, will speak, and I think will confirm what I've always known to be true, but she's never acknowledged publicly, which is it wasn't a big deal to get married to me. What she really wanted was my father as her father-in-law. Very importantly, Carol Miller, my father's beloved partner, will also speak. I'll be back with a remembrance as well. I want to especially thank Johanna, my sister, who will talk about her experiences because of the large number of cookies you will see when you leave in bags, and you should all take some. And she will tell you why she did it. She put them together for you. Stanzi, Johanna's daughter, did great work with the photos that you will see coming up on the TVs and with the program. And Lee, my daughter, and Cynthia's daughter, put together the invitation. So we want to thank everybody, and all our family members participated here. We have been asked if we would take comments at the end from the audience. And we thought about it, but decided not to go that route. Not because we think we're smarter or better or have better stories, but simply for the purposes of time. What we want to do is have some discourse from us, but we also want you to be able to talk in a reception afterwards. And there are people here. I've seen one of my closest friends, Jeff Wallens, and I haven't seen him in a long time, but he and I grew up in Five Fields together. Carol Roby, our next-door neighbor, Louis Pomerantz. We have people that go back in Five Fields. We have Lexington at home friends who know each other. We have relatives. So we want to give everybody a chance to talk to one another. And so we don't want to take more time with comments from here. But again, any stories you want to tell about my father, we're happy to hear. I had one woman come up to me at one of our Shiva ceremonies and said to me, "He saved me, he saved me, he saved me." And to this day, I don't know what he saved her from. So tonight, a few tears may be shed. My sister Margay has 17 boxes of tissues, so we're set. But we also hope you find yourself laughing and enjoying the things my father loved. And love he did. He loved working, traveling, reading, writing, sports, sailing, studying history, volunteering, politics, his family, Lexington, his Five Fields community. To honor him, I'm going to read something that he loved. He read material in many genres. One that he particularly loved was poetry. There is one poem in particular that he came back to many times. It's not a particularly deep or complicated poem, but it's lyrical and provides some very graphic and powerful images. This is the one poem that he read publicly, and he did so at a reunion of our Five Fields neighborhood with a few hundred people listening, including young children. As he recited the poem, a buzz came from the crowd. Many of the parents whispered their unhappiness at parts of the poem. My father ignored the chatter and finished the poem. That was his way, to pursue his passions as far as he could, sometimes heedless of the consequences, just as he sailed into the storms with women on board the boat who didn't know what he was getting them into. After he read the poem, he came over to me and asked how it went and what the audience was murmuring about. "Dad, you did great," I said, but some of the parents thought it wasn't really appropriate for the younger kids. He looked at me and shrugged. "Too bad," he said. Now, I know some of you won't like the poem. I know that because I have family members in the audience who don't like the poem. So I know that some of you won't like it. And so feel free to tell me that you don't like it, but all I'll be able to tell you is too bad. So I am now going to read my father's favorite poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee, by Robert Service. Now the groans are starting already. I get it. Go ahead, murmur. It'll be just like it was. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge, I cremated Sam McGee. Now, Sam McGee was from Tennessee, where the cotton blooms and blows. Why he left his home in the South to roam round the pole, God only knows. He was always cold, but the land of gold seemed to hold him like a spell, though he'd often say, in his homely way, that he'd sooner live in hell. On a Christmas day, we were mushing our way over the Dawson Trail. Talk of your cold through the parka's fold, it stabbed like a driven nail. If our eyes we'd close, then the lashes froze, till sometimes we couldn't see. It wasn't much fun, but the only one to whimper was Sam McGee. And that very night, as we lay packed tight in our robes neath the snow, and the dogs were fed and the stars overhead were dancing heel and toe, he turned to me and Cap, he said, I'll cash in this trip, I guess. And if I do, I'm asking you that you won't refuse my last request. Well, he seemed so low that I couldn't say no. Then he says with a sort of moan, "It's the cursed cold, and it's got right hold, till I'm chilled right through to the bone. Yet 'tain't being dead, it's my awful dread of the icy grave that pains. So I want you to swear, foul or fair, you'll cremate my last remains." A pal's last need is a thing to heed, so I swore I would not fail, and we started on at the streak of dawn. But God, he looked ghastly pale. He crouched on the sleigh, and he raved all day of his home in Tennessee, and before nightfall, a corpse was all that was left of Sam McGee. There wasn't a breath in that land of death, and I hurried, horror-driven, with a corpse half hid that I couldn't get rid because of a promise given. It was lashed to the sleigh, and it seemed to say, "You may tax your brawn and brains, but you promised true, and it's up to you to cremate my last remains." Now, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and the trail has its own stern code. In the days to come, though my lips were dumb, in my heart how I cursed that load. In the long, long night, by the lone firelight, while the huskies round in a ring howled out their woes to the homeless snows, oh God, how I loathed that thing. And every day that quiet clay seemed to heavy and heavier grow. And on I went, though the dogs were spent and the grub was getting low. The trail was bad and I felt half mad, but I swore I would not give in. And I'd often sing to the hateful thing, and it hearkened with a grin. Till I came to the marge of Lake Lebarge, and a derelict there lay. It was jammed in the ice, but I saw in a trice it was called the Alice May. And I looked at it, and I thought a bit, and I looked at my frozen chum. Then here, I said with a sudden cry, this is my crematorium. Some planks I tore from the cabin floor, and I lit the boiler fire. Some coal I found that was lying around, and I heaped the fuel higher. The flames just soared, and the furnace roared, such a blaze you seldom see. And I burrowed a hole in the glowing coal, and I stuffed in Sam McGee. Then I made a hike, for I didn't like to hear him sizzle so, and the heavens scowled, and the huskies howled, and the wind began to blow. It was icy cold, but the hot sweat rolled down my cheeks, and I don't know why. And the greasy smoke in an inky cloak went streaking down the sky. I do not know how long in the snow I wrestled with grisly fear, but the stars came out and they danced about ere again I ventured near. I was sick with dread, but I bravely said, I'll just take a peep inside. I guess he's cooked, and it's time I looked. Then the door I opened wide. And there sat Sam, looking cool and calm, in the heart of the furnace roar. And he wore a smile you could see a mile, and he said, please close that door. It's fine in here, but I greatly fear that you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plum Tree down in Tennessee, it's the first time that I've been warm. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Lebarge. I cremated Sam McGee. Louise?
A very different kind of reading. By Rabbi Chaim Stern. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me. Your laugh once lifted me. Your word was gift to me. To remember this brings a painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death has touched. Shadows are falling and I'm running out of breath. Keep me in your heart for a while. If I leave you, it doesn't mean I love you any less. Keep me in your heart for a while. When you get up in the morning and you see that crazy sun, keep me in your heart for a while. There's a train leaving nightly called When All Is Said and Done. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-lo. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-lo. Keep me in your heart for a while. Sometimes when you're doing simple things around the house, maybe you'll think of me and smile. You know I'm tied to you in a very special way. Keep me in your heart for a while. Hold me in your thoughts. Take me to your dreams. Touch me as I fall into view. When the winter comes, keep the fires lit, and I will be right next to you. Engine drivers headed north, a pleasant stream. Keep me in your heart for a while. These wheels keep a-turning, but they're running out of steam. Keep me in your heart for a while. Keep me in your heart for a while.
It's probably good I can't see all of you. Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Johanna Katz, one of Arthur's kids. I welcome all of you in person and those who are joining us via live stream. Thank you for coming to remember and celebrate my dad. If my dad were joining us through live stream, I like to think he'd be drinking a summer beer and eating peanuts, which he loved, or his favorite molasses cookies. He was with me yesterday when I spent the day baking them. And they were a labor of love from both of us. I hope you'll take a package when you leave, which has the recipe attached, and think of him when you eat them. Before I begin my remarks, as I'm self-conscious about it, I should note that half of my face is paralyzed, so I'm an ugly crier and on cue. So you'll see some ugly crying today. I want to start with a few words from my brother Harry, who could not be here tonight. His words: Dev, his mom Annie, and I send love and best wishes to all of those gathered to honor my father. Our thanks to the community and caregivers at Carlton Willard, who sustained him for so long. Pop is my lighthouse, always with me. May the memory of his generous nature, welcoming heart, and passionate soul provide hope and strength for you and your loved ones. back to me. I am Arthur's third child and younger daughter. I was not the oldest, nor the baby, and not the first daughter, but my father loved me anyway. He was that kind of dad. While my sister likes to think she was his favorite, and maybe she was, he never showed it, and for that I am thankful. Sorry, Margay. Ironically, some of his grandchildren carried on the tradition of who's Grampy's favorite. And in the end, none of it mattered because his great-grandson, Micah, brought him more joy than any of the rest of us. The one daughter who's not here with us today is Jordanos, and she's in the D.C. area with her son. Interestingly, it turns out those old birth order studies were right. In recent years, I've learned that each of the four of us, Kat's children, experienced my dad quite differently. In part, it was what phase of life my dad was in. It was also our birth order and our gender, our temperaments, and our family dynamics at the time. While my brother Jamie has memories of my dad's period of unemployment in his 50s as one that spurred him to build our cottage at Mattapoisett, I was a senior in high school watching a man in his 50s make vats of tapioca pudding and doing any errands possible to get through it. I spent the fall of that year helping my dad work on the family cottage every weekend, and my kids are going to hear a story I've never told before. I remember one day, I was 17 at the time, and as we pulled into the driveway to get to work, my dad lit a cigarette and started to smoke. I took the lighter and lit one of my own. He looked at me, I looked at him. I hadn't told my parents I smoked and had been hiding it for years. But what could he say? He smoked too. So he couldn't tell me I couldn't. And that was the essence of my dad. He was honest and fair. He did not expect anything of us that he did not expect of himself. If we made a mistake, he was forgiving. He wanted us to get a good education, encourage us to take opportunities. And as I got older, and especially as I had kids, he gave me confidence to be who I was and follow the path I chose for myself. And those are the lessons and values I learned, which I like to think I've passed on to my kids. My dad was an avid reader and never without a stack of books by his favorite chair, often reading several at one time. It often took several attempts to get his attention while he read. Dad, Dad, Dad! What? He knew so much, he knew so many words and their meanings, including way too many nautical terms. It gave him a very unfair advantage, and as a result, he never lost a game of Scrabble, except perhaps to my cousin Heidi. But you'd have to confirm that with her. And actually, I read what Semhall had to say, and I think he might have lost one game to her. He passed on his love of reading to all of us and his smarts to some of us. Following Jamie, it's like crazy. And the same with his sense of humor. After watching videos of his great-grandson Micah this winter, Stanzi asked him if Micah was smart like him. Dad replied, "He'd have to do pretty well to be smart like me." My dad was also a traveler. He loved traveling for work as a salesman in the early and middle years of his work life, and he always brought us back souvenirs. I still actually remember the wooden peacock he brought back with colored pencils sticking out for feathers. We all learned to love travel from my dad. Each summer he planned a family camping trip. We took trips to the national parks out west, and I should just say Margay, she's the first person I've ever known who ran away from a campground. We went up along the coast of Maine to Cape Breton Island and Prince Edward Island. We went to Point Judith and Block Island in Rhode Island and many places in between. I had severe motion sickness and threw up countless times each day of driving or ferrying on each trip. Undaunted, my dad soldiers on, stopping the car as often as I said, "Dad, I'm going to be sick." And the crazy thing is, I look back, nobody ever thought to bring a barf bag. One of the most memorable trips took us way off the beaten track across Newfoundland to the small French-owned islands of Saint Pierre and Miquelon. I never knew what piqued his interest in those islands, nor why we took the white Impala convertible with the leaky roof, hauling a pop-up camper across hundreds of miles of dirt and gravel roads instead of the trusty station wagon. The axle broke twice on the pop-up camper, and we couldn't keep up with the leaky roof, but that didn't deter my dad. All of my siblings and I have loved to travel as adults, as do my children, but I'm the only one who can honestly say that I have thrown up on more planes, trains, and boats, and in more countries than any of them, and I couldn't have done it without my dad. My dad also loved yearly trips with my mom. They ferried up to Alaska, took trips to countries in Europe and the West Coast. Ever the writer who wrote about each of these trips in a journal and made photo albums to capture the highlights. After a memorable trip to Paris, they were looking through the photos my dad had taken and came upon one of my mom sitting on the steps of Montmartre wearing 2 different colored shoes. They laughed hysterically. Later, he and Carol traveled and adventured as well. While in his 80s, he went ziplining in Costa Rica. He and Carol traveled to Patagonia, including an unforgettable ferry trip to Tierra del Fuego. We did a house swap with them in Denmark for a month. And on a trip of another kind, when he was about 84, my sister got an ear infection and couldn't fly back to Montana one summer. He suggested they just drive back. So they rented a car the next day, and he kept her company for the 4-day drive back. He was always up for a trip. We always had pets growing up. I remember going to Buddy Dog Humane Society that's still there in Sudbury to pick out our dog Ophi when I was a kid. My dad built me a rabbit hutch when I was 13 for my pet rabbit, Bartholomew. My dad bought a cage so Bartholomew and Ophi could join us for our camping trip to Point Judith and Block Island one summer. So for those of you who remember me walking around the Five Fields neighborhood with my rabbit on a leash, since I had realized I could use a Chihuahua harness and twine, you can blame my dad. He didn't stop me. My dad built other things too, like a house, the cottage, and there are pictures of it up outside. It was his favorite place in the world, where he sailed, dug for quahogs, swam, kayaked, and loved the view from the deck. You can read about it in the book on the table out in the lobby. It's called The Cat's Kit is the article. It was made from a kit built much like an erector set and brought all of our friends and family together for 2 summers of building in 1973 and 74. That house was a labor of love. Where did my dad get the idea that he could build a house? And why did he think he could? If you read the section about the Cat's Kit, you'll find he was looking for an affordable way to build his own small house so we could have our own cottage when we outgrew the small cottage we shared with my cousins on Buzzards Bay. I learned to do hard things from my dad and to persevere. One of my classroom rules as an elementary school teacher was do the things you think you cannot do. And because that was my dad. When I was a teenager, my dad built a potter's wheel for me with a 100-pound kick wheel so I could make pottery in the laundry room. He built my sister a silversmithing shop in a corner of the rec room, which I used when she went to college. He was unlike any other dad I knew at the time, except probably Jock Roby, who had a forge in his backyard. My dad allowed my sister and I at various times in our teenage and young adult years to drive across country with friends or strangers in our little VW Bugs. He assumed we would be fine and left the worrying to my mother. His confidence in us may have been misguided or wishful thinking, but we rarely had to call for help and always made it where we were headed. I always knew I'd be okay and that he'd have my back if I wasn't. And my dad was a singer. Growing up, we sang songs on car trips, at the cottage with my cousins Heidi and Barry playing guitar, and on camping trips, and at hootenannies on the playground with summer cookouts in Five Fields. I loved the old folk songs as much as my dad did, and I still do. In his later years, I'd still sing with him, and my kids got great pleasure in recording us crowing away on car rides to the cottage. During COVID, when we couldn't visit him on his nursing floor, I'd sing with him on our FaceTime and phone calls. One of the beauties of his dementia was that he would start singing when something reminded him of a song. And Carol, I don't know if you're going to say this in yours, but when we called Carol one day from his room, she asked him, as she always did, "Do you remember me?" And as always, he replied, breaking into, "Do you remember me?" Like my dad, my own life has not always followed conventions. He didn't follow the typical route of Jewish kids growing up. He and my mother didn't move to and start raising a family in a typical suburban neighborhood in the 1950s. They moved into a new modern neighborhood where the neighbors built a pool and a neighborhood playground, had cookouts and square dances in the summer, and went sledding and skating in the winter. We didn't go to temple, but he took us skiing. We didn't buy a cozy little cottage, but he took it upon himself to build one. Instead of hotel vacations, we went camping. By example, he showed us we could each follow our own path, make our own mistakes, pick our own selves up, and he had our backs when we needed it. We could reinvent ourselves as he did when we wanted or needed to. The freedom to live a life of my choosing was the greatest gift he gave me. Thank you. And don't forget to take cookies on the way out.
Ooh, that's bright. Yeah, that's super bright. Okay. Hi, I'm Stanzi. I'm the eldest grandchild. Most of us are here, Dawit, Hebron, Lee, and Samhal. But I wanted to mention Jordanos, who is at home in Virginia with Arthur's only great-grandchild that I mentioned. Micah put a smile on Guppy's face every time we showed him photos or videos, or when he got to FaceTime him, or especially when he got to see him. And Dev, our cousin, who is in New Jersey and couldn't make it here today. Being the first of a new generation, like Micah, I was part celebrity and part guinea pig. My grandparents took me to our summer cottage every summer weekend growing up, and Guppy and I would go to the Mattapoisett Diner on Sundays for breakfast. Or we'd go swimming in the Five Fields pool. Swimming here, meaning I'd be casually tossed into the water to learn how to swim. And in the winters, he'd try to teach me how to skate on the frog pond across from their house, assuming the pond was frozen over. But he also spent countless hours doing crossword puzzles with me, the New York Times always in pen, and listening to me drone on about whatever was going on in school or in life. Guppy loved just being around his family and friends. As I got older, he enjoyed coming to soccer and softball games, if only to take out his frustration with me doing the absolute bare minimum of standing there by gently suggesting to me something about, maybe you should try to go towards the ball like the other girls, with no luck whatsoever in either sport. In the past 10 years or so, I was able to spend extended time with him as somewhat of a guppy sitter at various times, especially once he was no longer able to drive. I would take him out to lunch, to get a haircut, or to the library for new books to read, and spend a few hours each day with him. It was during these times that his sense of humor really came out to me. We'd be driving around, and he'd make observations such as, "I don't see as many women with mustaches as I used to." Or one time when we were in Dunkin' Donuts and we saw a chunk of red licorice on the floor, he started walking wholly around it, so I kicked it out of the way and said it was just licorice and was harmless, to which he replied, "Well, I thought it could be an IED. You can't be too careful." His one-liners were always well-timed, albeit with his usual dose of intelligence. At times, I would ask about his childhood, once asking why he went to the Mount Hermon School instead of staying in town. His response was simple. The reason I was sent there was the high school in Glastonbury was inadequate for someone as brainy as I was. He was brainy, as he proclaimed himself, reading voraciously and doing crosswords. He loved to teach people about the history of Lexington, about sailing, about anything really. But most of all, he relished spending time with his kids, grandkids, great-grandchild, and the multitude of friends who felt like family. He truly loved and embraced everyone, whether he had known someone for years or just met them. He enjoyed just being around people, listening to what everyone was saying and doing, and we loved him back fiercely. Thank you. This one last? Okay. And I'm going to read something that my sister Semhall wrote. Grandfathers are special people who hold a unique place in our hearts. And as we know, it's undoubtedly clear that my grandfather was an extraordinary man. I loved spending time with him. One of my favorite memories was when I was younger and would get sick and couldn't go to school. He would pick me up and take me to his house. He would cook pasta with sauce for me and put on a movie from Netflix while he worked on the Lexington newspaper. It was a special time where I felt loved and taken care of by him. Another cherished memory was spending days with him and my mom at the cottage, where we used to play Scrabble, and he would usually win, although I remember one time, a very rare occasion, where I actually won. You did win. These special moments spent together were filled with love, laughter, and joy, and I treasure them deeply. My grandfather's nurturing care when I was sick and the fun times we had together playing Scrabble at the cottage are just a few of the examples of the many precious memories I have with him. Grampy's love was unconditional and unwavering. He was a confidant, cheerleader, and role model. From being there at my soccer games, she actually played soccer, to showing up to see my achievements, I knew I could always look into the crowd and find him. His love and warmth have left an indelible mark on my heart, and I will forever cherish the time I spent with him. He was not only a doting grandfather, but also a dedicated worker and a source of inspiration. His love and presence in my life have enriched me in countless ways, and I am grateful for the precious memories that I will carry with me always. And finally, I have something that my brother Dawit wrote. Grandpa, I just want to let you know you mean the world to me. Only a heart as dear as yours would give so unselfishly. The many things you've done, all the times that you were there, help me know deep down inside how much you really care. Even though I might not say, I appreciate all you do. Richly blessed is how I feel having a grandpa like you. Never selfish, always kind. Such happy memories you have left behind. Thank you. Hold on.
So beautiful. I feel like so many stories come back just hearing everybody speak. So Grampy was a kind soul. He was adventurous, a sailor, a talented writer, and a hardworking, humble man. But to me, I saw him as extremely wise and a loving grandfather. He was there for me when I would need him, but also respected me and never pushed. He even told my dad that I would learn to swim when I was ready. So I guess we have different experiences there. From helping me put on my snow jacket, to driving me to horseback riding lessons or soccer games, to giving me my first car, which was his old one, Grampy was always there. He was so excited to see me in my prom dress that he walked with his walker from Carol's house to my house instead of waiting for transportation to get him. He always finished his conversations with, "Thanks for calling. It was great to hear from you. Love you too." He was a beautiful man in many ways, I, amongst others, will miss him, and I will carry him and his lessons that he taught us with me. I appreciate his love and all of your support here today. Thank you so much.
You can all see why Arthur was so proud of his grandchildren. I'm Cynthia Pilch, married to Jamie Katz, daughter-in-law of Arthur Katz. I met Arthur when I was 17 years old and a college freshman, which was obviously several decades ago. Over the last 60 years, who can believe it, I have gotten to experience him up close and personal as his adoring and smart-ass daughter-in-law. It is fair to say that I loved, liked, respected, and cherished him for his unusual combination of intelligence, worldliness, talent, combined with his humility, generosity, dedication to family and community, his curiosity, very warm smile, and of course those beautiful, sparkling blue eyes. As far back as I can remember, Arthur regularly greeted me with an enthusiastic, "Hey, sport, how you doing?" He was also very warm and gracious to my large family of origin, many of whom are here, and to the variety of friends Jamie and I brought his way. Several of those people know more about American history because of the tours they took with Arthur on the Lexington Green. In my case, with Arthur's active support, I learned how to ski and get at least somewhat comfortable on a sailboat. I also enjoyed singing and dancing with him, and without doubt, he was the best jitterbug partner I've ever had. Most importantly, Arthur genuinely wanted to know and understand and support the things that were important to me in an accepting way. As an example, when Jamie and I got engaged after merely 13 years of knowing each other, my mother-in-law to be, Gladys, invited me to choose one of the family diamonds she had sitting in a box. My facial expression led Arthur to ask, "Is the problem political or aesthetic?" And when I answered both, he patiently helped me work through my ambivalence so that I am today comfortably and graciously wearing one of those lovely diamonds from one of those rings. And when I paused about swimming in a race to raise money for breast cancer, because I'm a slow swimmer and Jamie would be unable to be there at the race, Arthur quickly pointed out that my speed should not stop me from participating, and he would be at the race. As you've heard already, one of Arthur's most touching qualities was his reliability. So, of course, he was at Walden Pond when I was one of the last people to finish the race. And he reminded me that the point wasn't how quickly I swam, but that I had what it took to finish what I set out to do. And when I almost dropped out of massage school because of tendinitis in both arms and insecurities about the status of being a massage therapist versus a PhD researcher and educator, Arthur said, "Follow your heart and the rest will fall into place." When I finished my training in massage and Reiki, he was among the first people to ask if I would please work on him. I have recalled his advice regularly as I have combined the roles of healer and educator over many years. One highlight of my healing work was giving Arthur massage and Reiki during times of pain or discomfort. And I was especially grateful that in the last days of his life, when verbal communication ceased, that I could express my absolute unconditional love for him with healing touch. Besides reading, sailing, music, and community causes, traveling was a big passion, and Arthur loved visiting different cultures. Jamie, Lee, and I had the pleasure of traveling for a month with Arthur and his then new love interest, Carol Miller, to New Zealand. We then got to watch him and Carol become long-term partners, and the process reminded me that we all remain 16 years old when it comes to romance. That conclusion was reinforced when Arthur came to ask Jamie and me permission for him and Carol to stay at our house for a few days, because Carol's air conditioning was on the fritz, and it was really hot. Jamie and Arthur ended up in this hilarious conversation that ended with Jamie saying that it was fine for them to stay, but he didn't know how he'd respond when Lee was 16 and wanted a boyfriend to stay over, and used Arthur and Carol as evidence of why it should be okay. Arthur turned ashen, and Carol's air conditioning got fixed in record time. Arthur and I were both members of the Waltham Y, where I got to watch him work hard, very hard, to stay as functional as possible for as long as possible by doing water aerobics in a class for seniors, where he was literally the only male with many older women surrounding him. I vividly remember one day when I misplaced my car keys and had to interrupt his class full of women, all of whom were gawking because they thought I was Arthur's girlfriend. Well, Arthur became totally indignant that anyone would think such a thing, and I was delighted to explain to him that they were not entirely delusional to think that such difference in age might include romance, but he continued to be disturbed that those classmates would believe such a terrible thing about him. When Arthur's mobility got more limited several years ago, we bought him a walker, and I voted for the fanciest version available, and you'll see it on the pictures outside. We all chose the color red to make it as fun as possible, and it was great to see him buzzing around the neighborhood independently. One extreme example of his fierce independence and impatience came when, as you heard from our daughter, he wanted to see Lee in her prom dress, and so he rushed to their house. He rushed to our house because he couldn't wait the amount of time it would take for Jamie and Lee to get to his. Just as Arthur would want, that wonderful walker lives on and resides in our house for anyone to borrow when they need it. It helped me recover from a neck fusion this past fall, and I chuckled when the physical therapist told me I couldn't start with that walker because it moved too fast, so I had to work up to using it. The image of Arthur rushing to see Lee in her prom dress immediately came back to mind. In summary, Arthur has been a real mensch and a stellar father-in-law. And as I have said many times, you can generally believe in-laws who are handing out compliments. When I am feeling particularly sad about Arthur's passing, I find comfort in Gibran's quote, "When you are sad, look again into your heart, and you will find that that for which you are weeping has been your delight. So thank you, Arthur Katz, for being such a delight and great sport, and for bringing me so many gifts, the most precious of which keeps on living and giving in the form of Jamie Katz. Thank you.
When you remember me, it means that you have carried something of who I am with you, that I have left some mark. It means that you can summon me back to your mind, even though countries, years, and miles stand between us. It means that if we meet again, you will know me. It means that even if I die, you will still see my face, hear my voice, and speak to me in your heart. I remember meeting Arthur in a movie house in town. He was with her Johanna, and I was with my friend Marion Coletta. After the show, we met in the lobby to decry the awful movie we had just seen. But Johanna said, we have to meet again sometime. So, not long after that, we met in a Mexican restaurant, Johanna, Stanzi, and me. Sometime later, I got a call from Arthur inviting me to New Zealand with his son, daughter-in-law, and new granddaughter, Lee. Overwhelmed by the invitation, I called my daughter, Rima, who had been a buddy of Johanna's in high school. I don't even know him. Rima said, oh, go. And it was a wonderful trip. Jamie had spent a school year with a family, and they became our family on that trip. I had recently moved into 5 Fields, and both of us had lost our partners. So in our 70s, we became a couple. Soon, the walk from 18 Barberry to 23 Barberry became too long, and Arthur moved into 23. At the time, Arthur was writing for many local newspapers. We spent our time reading, walking, family gathering, and travel. On some summer weekends, we went to Mattapoisett, where Arthur had built his family cottage. There were many cousins, grandchildren, and friends gathering, and we all enjoyed being there. Arthur loved sitting on the porch, gazing at the calm waters of the bay. I had heard about Arthur's sailing escapades and longed to be a part of that history. We decided to buy a sailboat that we could maneuver ourselves. We found one and brought it to the beach. We spent many hours cleaning and preparing for its first sail. However, Arthur's back issue recurred, and we had to sell the boat. However, there was no way he could sail a boat with his back. However, knowing about Arthur's expertise, there was a small boat that I got on. He was the captain. The boat immediately capsized. That was the end of our sailing adventures. They remained in his past. We both loved traveling. Our first adventure was in Italy and France, Provence, a river trip. We did 2 house exchanges, one you heard about, one in France, south of Paris, where my daughter Tammy joined us, and the other in Copenhagen, Denmark, where the Berman family relatives took care of us. There, Johanna and Stanzi came along, and Johanna discovered IKEA. And our return home, by the way of Iceland, we traveled with many IKEA treasures. We drove to Nova Scotia and were greeted by friends. We visited Margay in Montana and even took an overnight train from Portland, Oregon, to Oakland, California, where my daughter Tammy met us. Then off to Santa Fe for my daughter Rima's 50th birthday. But the trip Arthur loved most was Patagonia. We traveled by boat to the most southern part of the Americas, went off to an island that had at least 200 steps to a statue, a very special statue of a bird. Its wings were of negative space with outlines in metal. Arthur walked those steps. I see him flying on the wings of the bird home.
The story arcs and the lessons learned from the lives of many people are open and obvious. Not so with my father. He never gained extraordinary wealth. He never achieved extraordinary fame. He never had one bright and shining talent or achievement. Instead, he was just very good at a lot of things and passionate about a lot of things. If you worked with him in business, you might not know that he was a historic guide on the Lexington Green, and a volunteer tutor at Bridge School, or a town meeting member for more than 20 years. If you worked with him on the Cary Library Committee, or read his articles in local newspapers, you might not know that he had become a very successful director of marketing at Velcro. By the end, when he'd combined his talents, his efforts, his passions, he created a remarkable life and legacy. And that legacy is even more remarkable when you know some of the things that very few of us have known. But first, what were the special traits we've talked about tonight? And why are so many of you here? Yeah, I know, free food, but that's separate. So here's what some of you wrote about my dad. He was kind, generous, and warm. He was there when I needed him. He had a wonderful sense of humor and an eclectic knowledge, always upbeat, generous with advice, a positive presence who inspired us all. Arthur was a true friend of the community and to me personally. He cared for others, and it showed. Now let's be clear. My father was not a saint. He was very human, with faults and foibles. There were, in fact, some people to whom he was not so kind and welcoming. Here are a few. He never liked my sister Marigay's boyfriends between the ages of when she was 15 to 25, and that dislike was usually well deserved. He also never liked his grandchildren's soccer coaches. All of the kids you saw on the stage at one point or another played soccer, and he would go to the games and he yelled at all the coaches, never his grandchildren, because he believed that the coaches never put those kids in the right positions to succeed, and that included me when I coached Lee. I should note that privately he did tell me on a number of occasions that both Stanzi and Lee could have run a little more often than they actually did. Finally, my father was a devoted Democrat. He argued with his friends, but always with civility. It was his Democratic friends that made him furious. He and Sam Berman, his close friend for over 60 years, had a ridiculous but vociferous and very passionate argument in one gubernatorial candidate earlier this century. Sam insisted that Democrats had to vote for a progressive candidate to uphold their principles, even if that candidate had no chance to win the general election. My father insisted, just as passionately, that Democrats should never throw away votes. They should vote for a candidate who could beat the Republican. They argued about this until they stopped talking, and it was only after the election that they came to their senses and started talking again. So my father was a very special man, but he was still a man, and he had his flaws. So where did his attributes come from? Some clearly from his nurturing. His family purchased a general store in Glastonbury, Connecticut when he was young. The store supported my father's family of 5, plus 2 other men and the families they had who worked there. My father worked from a very young age, learning the importance of hard work and money, and also learning to respect everyone who walked in the door who might buy something that would help the family. While he became a good salesman, he also became a good listener. He wanted to help people get what they wanted. Money mattered. So on Sundays, and sometimes during Prohibition, he sold nip bottles of whiskey out of the back of the store. He also learned something about empathy and helping people in need. His father, my grandfather, would make sandwiches. And then my grandfather and father would take them to give to the hobos who had gathered at a nearby railroad crossing, hobos being those men, largely men, who had become out of work as a result of the Depression. But all of us, every one of us, are more than our nurturing. There is our nature, how we are wired. It turns out that my father's DNA had a whole lot of grit in it. One old friend of my father's wrote to us not of my father's kindness or warmth, but of his determination. In his last years, when he was still writing for the newspapers, he had to climb up a number of flights of stairs to deliver his stories by hand. With his arthritis, it was a slow trek with many steps. But every time he made it all the way. His friend who wrote to us worked in an office at the top floor. He watched and he heard my father ascend. And so he wrote to us of my father's persistence. Yeah, he did persevere and he did succeed. But he also failed. Things did not always go as he planned. He suffered personal and business losses, fear and grief. And here's his last and most important lesson, one that most of us couldn't see, a lesson that we've all heard, but one he most profoundly lived. And that is, it doesn't matter how many times you fall down. It matters how many times you get back up. In his professional life, he hit some major setbacks. After serving in the Japanese occupation force during World War II, he and my mother moved to Boston. My father went to work at a large retail department store. After a few years, he bought a small business all on his own. Maybe he liked the idea of going back to the family store he'd once worked in. But the guy who sold it to my father had hidden some real problems with the business, and my father lost the company. With small children on the scene, back to being an employee in a large company he went, and he worked over a period of years in a number of different companies. Then in the early 1970s, another big bump in the road. He was laid off. After a period, he found another job, and then, after that job, he finally found the place where everything came together for him. A great group of colleagues who understood and appreciated him, a great role, landing him his last and best job, heading marketing at Velcro. He had a long, winding professional journey that led him to some difficult places, but ultimately allowed him to flourish. There's another example that occurred during his young adulthood, when he was a parent of very small kids, where he was literally knocked down and got back up. This is a story I've not told, just as Johanna told one. This is one that I only recently became aware of. My family does not know this. A few of you will recall the day the music died. You got to be a little bit old to do this. February 3rd, 1959. Yes, Lee, I was alive back then. February 3rd, 1959. A small plane flew and crashed. And in that small plane were the Big Bopper and Buddy Holly, two very prominent, well-known, very successful rock musicians in the then beginning rock and roll scene. It was a tragedy. Don McLean's American Pie, that song is written about that night, when the day the music died as that plane fell to the ground. There was another airplane crash that day, much less publicized. Another plane flew that night in February 1959 from Chicago to LaGuardia. LaGuardia is an airport in New York, and the plane crashed just short of a runway. My father was on that flight. He flew home to Boston the next day. How he walked onto a plane the day after he had crashed in a plane, I can't tell you. I don't know. I was 6 years old at the time. I still remember that he told us that he'd been very lucky, that a few other people had been injured, but he had been okay, and he'd walked off without any injury. I asked him about it a few times when I was young, and he always gave me the same story. The problem is, it wasn't the full story. And I don't know whether he ever told the full story to anyone except my mother. Yeah, my father was on a plane that crashed at LaGuardia, but there were not a few passengers who were injured and walked off. There were 73 people on that plane. 65 of them died. My father did not walk off. He was hauled out of the river. The next day, he came to Boston, and the day after that, he went back to work. And I don't know who he ever talked to about that. It was never known in the family. It was never known to any of the close friends of his that I knew. Luck, fate, or the random assignment of his seat in that airplane gave him years of opportunity in life that others on that plane did not have. My father took on more town and neighborhood activities as he got older, and the kids left the nest. His volunteer activities increased, and he was elected to town meeting. He turned 60 in 1985, and then his town activities, his volunteer activities, his newspaper writing, all of it seemed to increase even faster. So what was the big deal about turning 60? I mean, yeah, we all think of it as a milestone, but it seemed something bigger to him. Well, it was. His grandfather and his father had both died of heart attacks when they were 59. And so he lived the last few years before 60 thinking that he was not going to make it to 60. And so when he did, he had a new lease on life. In politics, he evolved as well. In 1970, I went to a college near here, and in my sophomore year, I ran for town meeting and won. After a couple of years, town meeting had a particularly controversial vote. We were asked to approve a new apartment complex that included rents at fixed, modest rates for a small number of units. The development would be close to a major intersection near our house, and it was the first development in town that had rent caps as a measure to ensure some small number of affordable units. I supported the new regulation. My parents were not supportive initially. We discussed it a number of times. This proposal seemed to threaten the community that they'd helped to build. A couple of weeks before the election, I came home for dinner. While we were eating, there was an enormous crash as a brick came through the front kitchen window. A rubber band around the brick held a note. The note included very graphic, very anti-Semitic language, threatening me and telling me not to vote for the development. The note hit my parents harder than the brick hit the window. Perhaps it was the anti-Semitism that they thought they'd escaped, or perhaps they'd realized that what was at stake was something bigger than their traffic issues in the neighborhood or our small neighborhood at all. They never argued with me again about the development. I voted for the zoning changes, and it passed. Some years later, my father became a town meeting member, and around the same time, he joined a Lexington group that advocated for affordable housing, and he became a member of that group and a leader of that group for many years. And he worked very hard at trying to change housing patterns in Lexington. So you've heard about it. How does somebody repair a broken heart? In 1998, my mother became ill with cancer. She had done all the cooking and cleaning and household work, although the household work, not so much, for their entire marriage. But my father took over the shopping and cooking and household work almost instantly without any complaint until she died just after 9/11 in 2001. At that point, for months, he became bereft and lonely. After a time, he met Carol, and soon he began a lovely, strong, and caring relationship with her. They made new friends together, traveled, went to plays and concerts, remained active in the town, and they supported each other wonderfully. Finally, there came a day in April 2020. My father had been ill and weak during the previous winter. We'd had to place him in a nearby nursing facility because of his multiple medical conditions. Putting him in that institution was terribly painful, and the onset of COVID made it far worse. On that April day, I got a call from the nursing home telling me that he was symptom-free, but he tested positive for COVID. And on a call 2 days later, I learned he'd been placed on oxygen and had pneumonia. His situation was dire, and we could not visit him. It was a terrible situation for him and for us until it wasn't. Somehow, 10 days later, he was wheeled out of his COVID room, one of the few to have done so at that point. The staff lined the hallway and clapped and cheered for him. That was the last time he fell down. And got back up. Sometimes my father got knocked around and had the confidence to keep heading on the path that he had already laid out for himself. Sometimes he realized he had to change his path. But no matter when he fell, no matter where he fell, he got back up. And he always reached back when he had stabilized his situation. He always reached back and brought others around him back up. I suspect there may be a few in the audience to whom his hand was extended on occasion. So my father was indeed warm, caring, welcoming, kind, generous, all things worth remembering. But I hope that as well, for some of you, the next time the future looks dark, the journey looks hard, what is ever ahead of you is far more difficult than you ever imagined when the pain and the pressure are bearing down on you. You'll remember my father, the king of second chances. The man who never gave in, never gave up. Thank you for joining us, and Louise is going to bring us to a close. Thank you.
We remember Arthur in so many ways. There will be moments when you will remember him. Perhaps at some of these times. Join me in the words, we remember him if you like. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember him. In the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we remember him. In the opening of buds and rebirth of spring, we remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. In the blueness of the sky and the warmth of summer, we remember him. In the rustling of the leaves and the beauty of autumn, we remember him. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember him. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember him. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. We say shalom and not goodbye, for shalom is goodbye and hello and wholeness and peace, all threaded together in one breath. And in one breath, we too say goodbye. Goodbye to a hand to hold, a kiss and a tight embrace. And in the same breath of shalom, we say hello. Hello to an ocean of memories and a rush of emotion, gratitude and sorrow, tears and laughter, and trembling and fatigue, all in one breath. We say shalom and not goodbye. Words by Rabbi Zoe Klein. There's a Jewish tradition of reciting the Kaddish in memory of a loved one. It speaks about life and peace rather than death. And you have the family, does the family have copies? No. Okay. Up here? There you go. The family has copies, and if you know the words, feel free to join in as well. The words speak of life and love. And here an interpretation by Rabbi Seidenberg. May the life and love within us and between us be strengthened. May the breath that fills all breaths fill the cosmos with peace. And may peace and life flow to us, to our community, to all peoples, and to all beings in this world. And let us say, Amen. If you'd like to stand and join or stand and listen to the Kaddish, I invite you to do so now. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah v'alema divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei בחייכון וביומכון, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי תקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן ביעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל יושבי תבל, ואמרו amen. The one who makes peace in the furthest reaches of creation will bring peace to us and to all living beings, and let us say amen. May the memory of Arthur Katz be for a blessing. Please be seated. Except maybe the family members who I'll invite to join me here on the stage, because we have some words to a song to sing. There's words in this program with a beautiful picture, and any family members who'd like to come up and join me to sing these words can do so at this time. No pressure. I'm staying at the mic, guys. You don't have to worry. But we hope that the rest of you will join as well. Okay, say your words.
Oh, thank you. So this Irene Goodnight Irene was one of my dad's favorite songs, and we sang it together for as long as I've lived. So I thought it was a really fitting end. He'd wish he was here.
We'll bring him here.
Absolutely.
We will feel him. Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams. Last Saturday night I got married. Me and my wife settled down. Now me and my wife are parted. I'm gonna take another stroll downtown. Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams. Sometimes I live in the country. Sometimes I live in the town. Sometimes I have a great notion to jump in the river and drown. Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams. We invite you now to remain in your seats for just a moment so that the family can leave the auditorium first and be ready to greet you at the reception. Thank you so much. May Arthur's memory be for a blessing.